אני מזמין את דוקטור אקסל טולנר לשאת דברים. בבקשה, דוקטור טולנר.
בוקר טוב, תודה רבה. זה כבוד גדול בשבילי להיות כאן, ושמחה גדולה לדבר עליכם. אבל העברית שלי לא מספיק, אז אמשיך באנגלית. In the Hebrew translation of the title of my lecture, it defines education closer as education of the Shoah. I want to present to you three examples of such educational efforts on the basis that have been made in Protestant churches in Bavaria. Talking about churches, I directly refer to three church buildings that have become places where aspects of Shoah or Holocaust education take place. I assume that church buildings are places of remembrance. Remembrance leads to the very heart of practicing Christian faith in public services. As Christians, we serve God by commemorating Jesus in his Jewishness, his life and teachings, in his death and his raising of the dead. Architecture and equipment of churches contain traces of this faithful remembrance from their edification up to now. Education via architecture and equipment of churches means to explore and to open up these traces to those who come as guests and visitors. This so-called church pedagogy, Kirchenpädagogik, uses similar methods like museums or memorial sites. It addresses to people of any age. Although churches want, should and can be places of reconciliation and peace, we sometimes detect traces of hatred and discord as well. The Jewish-Christian dialogue that evolved after the Shoah brings a deeper understanding of how Jews and Christians are related to each other. Shame about the silence of churches and Christians towards the genocide of the European Jewry was one of the major impulses to make a change. I'm going to present three examples which deal with both dimensions of shame. The objective side of shame as the infamy of persecution, and the subjective side of shame as a feeling that something happened that must not have happened, and that it is upon us to make something like this never happen again. On the other hand, the Jewish-Christian dialogue opens up ways for a new and adequate understanding of each other. In terms of education, that means first and foremost for us Christians to listen to Jewish voices and to learn how Jews define themselves and which self-images they have. At the same time, we are recognizing that traditional negative Christian images of Jews are nothing but prejudice. Example number one. From 2005 to 2011, I served as pastor at the medieval church of St. Sebaldus in Nuremberg. It is one of the major points of interest for tourism in the old city of Nuremberg, visited by around 400,000 persons a year. St. Sebaldus was heavily damaged in World War II and afterwards reconstructed again. Most of the medieval art was then hidden in the underground and saved. So nowadays, St. Sebaldus holds again art from famous artists. The most famous among them surely is Albrecht Dürer. St. Sebaldus was the church he went to in his lifetime. Today, St. Sebaldus is still the church where a congregation of around 2,300 people living in the neighborhood celebrates its services. For the members of the parish and for Christian believers, St. Sebaldus is not a mere touristical point of interest, but a place for prayer, for spiritual experience, for listening to the Word of God in words or in music. So the parish wants to open it up to the guests primarily as a place of Christian faith and hope in past and present. As pastor, I was responsible for the education via art and architecture. I had a team of around 25 church guides whom I educated and trained regularly for their guided tours and explanations. We guided and educated children as well as youth and adults. There are a lot of beautiful pieces that witness profound Christian piety and faith. But soon I got to know that there are several paintings, sculptures and stained glass which show negative medieval Christian views on Judaism. Some anti-Jewish pieces were already a part of the training program for the guides to face the dark side of history and the art of the church. There also were small flyer and rare guided tours dealing with anti-Jewish art. In the last decade, we tried to intensify our efforts to face the anti-Semitic traditions at our church. We increased the number of guided tours which focused on these pieces. The guides got special trainings which helped them, including anti-Jewish art in their guided tours. And we established particular tours dealing with our anti-Jewish tradition, asking how to overcome prejudice. A new detailed flyer that presents the range of medieval anti-Jewish art within the church was edited too. Some of those depictions, for example, blame Jews in general for being responsible for the death of Jesus. Other sculptures claim that Christianity has replaced the Jews as the beloved and elected people of God, and Jews are cursed. And a few sculptures even humiliate and mock Jews. We learn of it that history is not a request concert where you can choose the highlights and omit what you don't like. In other words, educating history at St. Sibalus means if you want to present Dürer, you also have to present anti-Semitic depictions. If you want to express pride, you also have to express shame. Educating history after the Shoah means learning and teaching the whole story. To detect and face the ambivalence of our heritage was a difficult way with a lot of debates in the parish beginning from the late 1980s. We all are convinced that our church should be a symbol for true reconciliation and peace. And we felt and feel shame that it contains many traces of anti-Semitism, of discord and hatred too. The most insulting example of anti-Jewish pieces is the so-called Judensau sculpture from the late 14th century in the exterior of the church. It shows four men that can be identified as Jews according to the medieval dress code. One is feeding the sow, two are suckling like piglets, and one is collecting the excrements. I don't need to emphasize that pork isn't kosher and the presumed symbiosis of the sculpture is a mere fiction and an insult to Jews. Yet, in medieval Christian art, the swine means even more than humiliation. It symbolizes the devil. The message of the sculpture is clear and shameful. It's a total demonization of Jews and Judaism. National Socialist anti-Semitism was not a slip-up in German history. It has its models, even in the Middle Ages. Education on anti-Semitic traces of our history is urged by the fact that the demonization of Jews and Judaism hasn't stopped. Recent studies in Germany show that around 20% of the population share anti-Jewish attitudes. And among them, there's a significant number of people that consider themselves religious and engaged in their parishes. When people were demonstrating against the Gaza war in 2014 in German cities, you could hear the curse word Judensau. St. Sebaldus Church offers an authentic place to inform about caricature and reality. Here you can explore intensively how caricatures like Judensau and other depictions have been degrading and defaming Jews for centuries. And here you can ask for their effects up to the present. As you all know, Nuremberg is not only the city of St. Sebaldus Church, but also the city of the notorious anti-Semite Julius Streicher, and the city of the anti-Semitic laws that preceded and prepared the annihilation of European Jewry in the World War II. The parish therefore committed even more to education about the shameful anti-Jewish history of its church. In 2005, the St. Sebald Parish Council declared, I quote, "The defamatory image of the Judensau from the late Middle Ages is an expression of the anti-Semitism which prepared the ground for the Shoah. It was the same evil spirit that Jewish citizens of Nuremberg were despised and demonized, driven out and exterminated right through the centuries up until the 20th century. Filled with shame, we bow down before millions of victims of anti-Semitism, begging them and our common God for forgiveness." End of quote. It is shame that enables both distance from the negative meaning of medieval sculptures and our tradition, and empathy with Jews that are insulted by it today. And if we think of it, we may notice that eventually it's an insult against Christian faith too, since it is based upon the same roots as Judaism, and our faith is aimed at Jew Jesus. The second example I'm going to present is the Church of St. Matthew in Höchberg. Höchberg is a village around 15 kilometers southwest from Würzburg in northern Bavaria. From the early 18th century onwards, there lived only either Catholic or Jews there for over 200 years. It was a small, rural Jewish community with maximum 200 members in early 19th century. In the 19th and early 20th century, Höchberg had a well-known Jewish Talmud Torah preparatory school, Präparandenschule, for the teacher seminary that Rav Seligmann Bamberger founded at Würzburg. The Würzburger Rav and his wife Kela are buried at the Jewish cemetery of Höchberg. In the early 20th century, more and more Jewish inhabitants left the village and moved to the city. The school finally had to be closed in 1931. Under the Nazi rule, there lived less than 20 Jews in Höchberg. Most of them fled persecution and emigrated. On November 10, 1938, SS-men desecrated the synagogue from the early 18th century by devastating the interior completely. After World War II, Protestant refugees came to Höchberg and founded a Protestant congregation. In the early 1950s, they bought the former synagogue by the Jewish Restitution Successor Organization. After some decades of silence, the parish has started to discover their Jewish heritage and the Jewish history of their church around in the 1990s. Martin Eisen, who was pastor then, called his guide to St. Matthew Synagogue and Church Guide, Synagogen- und Kirchenführer. He was convinced that the shameful part of history cannot be denied, but education is needed. The parish started commemorating the members of the former Jewish community. It started to present to the public that their church was a synagogue that was destroyed by the Nazis. They also indicated the Jewish roots of their church by a menorah and a memorial plate where the Torah Ark once was located. Education at St. Matthew and Höchberg meant to show that something and somebody is lacking because of the Shoah, and that this gap lasts. Therefore, they focused on the former Jewish population not as an anonymous number of victims, but as men, women, and children who lived their lives, who have hoped, laughed, worked, prayed, loved, played football, drank beer and wine with the neighbors, and much more. The presentation of the church at the homepage includes some information on Judaism and the Jewish roots of Christianity, as well as on the former use of the building as synagogue. It also contains a commemoration of the pogrom of November 1938. I quote, "It was a vicious time that we must not forget. God may forgive us the trespasses that we have committed to His people and be gracious and merciful to us." In around 2005, when Pastor Eisen and teacher of religion Angelika Wagner started working with students of the secondary school on local Jewish history, the students explored the biographies of the last 6 Jewish inhabitants from Höchberg. Their research on Salomon and Selma Brafman, Recha, Emanuel, Rivka, and Miriam Eldod lead to a commemoration ceremony in 2008. The students present their research, and the artist Gunther Demnig installed 6 so-called stumbling stones with the names and the basic biographical information in front of the former houses of the families Brafman and Eldod. I come to my third and last example. The third example is located at Dachau concentration camp memorial site. Today, there are several religious memorials commemorating the suffering of the various prisoners. Dachau was established first and foremost as a camp for political prisoners. Among them, there were Jews and Christians of various countries. From 1960 on, Roman Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, and Russian Orthodox memorials were established. The Protestant Church of Germany established in 1968 the Church of Reconciliation. Dutch Protestants who were arrested in Dachau encouraged the Germans to build this church and to commemorate there the ones who were murdered in the concentration camp. The inauguration service took place on April 30 in 1967, and the sermon was held by Pastor Martin Niemöller, who was arrested in Dachau from 1941 to 1945. It is often said that the architecture of the Church of Reconciliation is shame expressed in stones. The architect Helmut Striffler, born in 1927, had to face various challenges. Can there be built a church at all, where thousands and thousands have been tortured and killed? Can there be any architecture that is not ruled by the monstrosity of the camp and its logic that annihilates humanity at all? And if so, how to build a religious memorial that can be dedicated to the commemoration of the persecuted, their suffering and their death, as well as to the commemoration of the guilt of the perpetrators? Striffler looked for an architecture that tries to escape the logic of death. As soldier in World War II, Striffler experienced that digging in sometimes was the only way to find a shelter. So he dug in the church and by this tried to escape the logic of the concentration camp, but being present there at the same time. Striffler also avoided the rational angles that dominate the camp architecture. Instead, he used a broken and irregular form for the church. I think that this may be seen as a symbol for the deep irritation and trouble that shame is trying to deal with. The building complex itself appears crouching and inconspicuous. It is designed like a path that leads into the depth and finally back to the level of the former camp. First, you have to step down to the court, then walking into a passageway that leads through the prayer room beside, and finally to the stages back upstairs. Besides, the complex also contains a room for education, for encounter, lectures, seminars, discussion, or debates on suffering and crime. The complex offers an opportunity to express shame, again in the double meaning of the word. It enables to reflect the infamy of the terror as well as the feeling of embarrassment of the visitors. From the beginning, education was an important part of the work at the Church of Reconciliation. The current pastor, Dr. Björn Mensing, reports that the architecture always inspired the educational and spiritual program up to now. He emphasizes that it truly establishes a healthy distance to the monstrosity of the former camp. This enables the visitors to reflect their experience at the memorial site. Helmut Striffeler's architecture makes the Church of Reconciliation a center of quiet reverence and an education on both victims and perpetrators. Since the 1980s, the Church of Reconciliation also has focused on present challenges like neo-Nazism, anti-Semitism, and xenophobia. Since then, they have also volunteers of Aktion Sühnezeichen from different countries who serve there usually for 1 year. In 2005, the former chairman of the Council of the Evangelical Church in Germany, Bishop Dr. Wolfgang Huber, summed up the impulses of shame for education, and I quote this: "The shame about the violence the Germans committed and the solidarity with their victims must be ingrained in our cultural memory. Whoever wants to suppress such commemoration, understanding this as expression of national liberation, must not have any acceptance in Germany. Therefore, we have to embed remembrance in our society and in our churches, particularly since the number of eyewitnesses is decreasing. According to the biblical command, parents have to tell from the liberation of the people of Israel from slavery when they are asked for. It is upon us to report from the liberation of Europe from inhuman violence when our children ask us. It is upon us to confess where our convictions and values are ingrained, in ascribing greatness to God only and loving our neighbors." Thank you very much.